Hello, everyone, and welcome to this random stream I'm doing at, May 17th, I guess it is, 2021. So, this stream is more or less an experiment. As you may have realized if you're watching this on YouTube, I disabled my superchats largely, and I guess I'll go into this for maybe a little bit later. I disabled my superchats as a sort of a psychological experiment with how I relate to this platform, with how I think a lot of other people should relate to this platform. And I really don't want to start any kind of knife fight or any kind of holier than thou contest between myself and other right wing YouTubers. But for the longest time and for the last month, really there's just been this fundamental question that's occupied my mind. And that's been, how do we just totally redesign our relationship with the internet? The way it's working right now isn't working. The way that online and real life interface, the things that online highlights and magnifies, are the worst elements of human psychology. And again, I know that I'm kind of doing this live stream probably in the anticipation of an essay that I'm trying to write and that I'll post on my YouTube channel. The thing is that I don't know if it's really healthy to be part of the online culture as it exists right now, at least in the same way as it exists. The thing is, people give me crap about watching BreadTube, but I have been watching them. A little bit more now that I have more free time, and a lot more of my work every day consists of chores where I have my hands free. And I feel like I'm watching people destroy themselves in slow motion. They're destroying their attention spans, they're destroying their emotional stability, and they're really not getting any content out of the interaction. I don't know what people are learning. I don't know what's really being provided to people. I know, again, the reason why this isn't a distance proper is that I don't have a talk prepared. I'm just speaking extemporaneously here. And one thing I am actually developing as a sort of an idea is just, how are we going to go forward as an online community? I have no intention of leaving the internet. I only want to speak to the internet when I have something to say. But I think questions count as something to say. I really do believe that. And so the question I kind of want to discuss now and going on into the future is, how do we actually want to modify our relationship with the mainstream culture and the internet writ large, which are more or less the same thing right now. Because when you look at what the internet has done to people, it is absolutely horrifying. It wasn't pretty before 2020. After 2020, you look like you're seeing some kind of degenerative cult that people are getting stuck into, and nothing good is being generated out of it. Now, obviously, the solution I think most people have is, okay, well, these people on the left, not necessarily on the left, but perhaps just, on the grift side of politics, they're just doing politics so they can get the clout, so they can get the audience. I don't even know why I have headphones and I'm not listening to anything here. So this is totally redundant. But, people have leftists and people who are just doing this for the grift, which are sometimes very, very hard to distinguish in this day and age. They have a lot of personality defects. They have a lot of internal pathologies. And so the solution from the right is, the solution obviously is to do what they're doing, but do it more healthy. Continue to interact with the platforms in the same way that they're interacting with the platforms, but don't be as complete a grifter as Vosh. Don't be as complete a degenerate as someone like Demon Mama. Just establish boundaries and have the right politics. I don't know. I don't think that's working for me. If nothing else, I think it's apropos to point out that we can't win this game. We can't win this game because the thing that social media is helps the kind of thing that the left is, or helps the kind of thing that the grifter is, more than it helps the sincere believer. And I'm a sincere believer. I said before, I disabled super chats from my channel, and this is really what we're testing out in this live stream, is just running a long Q&A without super chats. I've had a troubled relationship with super chats. Obviously, the first problem being that 30% of it goes to Google. That's, in my opinion, exorbitant, but, not that I'm a free marketer, but it is something that I signed up for. It is something that I understood, and I understand that companies have constraints, especially companies that run in very, very low margins, and Google is no different. And you can't fault people for leaving money on the table, so to speak, when it comes to revenue, especially for internet companies that have very, very low margins. That wasn't really the issue. I hate Google. But the bigger issue is just seeing what immediately super chat culture produced on both the right and the left. On the right, super chat culture immediately produced the internet blood sports regime, which in many ways was the beginning of the end of any kind of right-wing ascendancy online. Not that I necessarily appreciated all of the people that were in ascendancy in 2017. I had big disagreements with a ton of them. But at the same time, by the time internet blood sports came around, it was obvious that it would never be allowed to continue for right-wingers, that this would eventually, in short order, be shut down, right? That was very, very obvious. And I'm kind of amazed, I don't want to cast aspersions on this people, but I am amazed that people like Ethan Ralph, seeing what was already going on with the Worski stream, thought that they could create a career on YouTube around this stuff, when it was obvious that this was going to get banned in very, very short order. But even if it wasn't going to get banned, what IBS created was politics as spectacle. Not politics in service of truth, but not politics as a means of discovering an identity or figuring out what the hell is going on in the real world, or quote-unquote building community, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more later. What IBS Internet Blood Sports was politics as drama and politics as entertainment. It turned internet politics into a professional wrestling match. And I didn't like what that did to the right for the brief period of time that the right was really pioneering this method. And post Destiny's arrival on the scene, it was also very clear that regardless of how well the right did at owning people, or whatever people called it back in 2018, I think pwning was out of fashion by then at least, it was very clear that the left could do whatever the right was doing faster and more effectively, and in a way that would generate more super chats and more revenue that they could keep. By the time 2017 rolled around and super chats became a thing on YouTube, the sort of reign of the streaming grifter was more or less an inevitability. And what preceded was sort of less YouTube politics and more a sort of YouTube politics version of My 600-Pound Life, where you just saw the worst elements of the political sphere online gain prominence because they were able to tell everyone exactly what they wanted to hear. Maybe they should have called this era of YouTube My $600 Super Chat. And it was just disgusting. There was a point where, and this is more or less my reason for killing super chats, there's more or less a point, I think, last month, where I was watching the fourth or fifth Vosh clone and just thinking, my God, this is just a horrible thing we've created. I don't want to participate in this, because every time I participate in this, I'm going to feel like I'm doing what this person does. That I'm some kind of dancing monkey that people put on in the background. And there's no real learning, there's no real development. All I'm offering people is a little dopamine hit, a soundtrack to a video game, a fake community, and we'll probably talk a little bit later about the difference between fake communities and real communities. Fake community, and a feeling that we're on the winning side. That's always when you want to talk about what Vosh or Xander Hall offers their audience. It's the feeling of being on the winning side. I know people in our sphere tend to give Lauren Southern a lot of crap for herself kind of seeming like a grifter in the early part of political YouTube on the right. But Lauren Southern engaged with a lot of these streaming personalities. First, Xander Hall, a pretty derivative Vosh clone, and second, she engaged with Hunter Avalon, who I'm not so sure I would classify Hunter as a streamer, but a grifter he certainly is. And in that space, it was really obvious. I mean, what's so funny is both of the characters, they immediately do the debunking thing, where they just drop studies that they haven't read at Lauren Southern with the hope that they can outrun her, right? So back in high school Oxford-style debate, this tactic was called spreading, right? So spreading is a tactic. We call it debunking now, right? Where you read why do I keep on saying right? We call it debunking now, and that strategy is you Google search a bunch of things related to your argument. You read the abstracts of all those articles, and then when the time for debate comes, you just drop those articles in succession to make it seem like the overwhelming amount of evidence is basically backing you up. And then immediately after you do that, you immediately go on to moralizing and defending the science. And because as long as you defend the science, you're a good guy, the other person must be a bad guy. So the conversation stops being about what is true and starts being about who's the bad person. And that's really what these conversations generate. It's really horrific. I don't exactly know how to process it. And, as much as people might not like Lauren Southern, I don't know. You watch it's sort of like Encino Man or Demolition Man, where Lauren Southern is this 2016 political YouTube specimen that's been frozen in amber for 3 years and teleported to 2021. And she's been unfrozen, and now she's talking to her counterpoints in 2021. And all her counterpoints in 2021 have had their brains fall out of their skulls. Even Hunter Avalon, who's supposed to be, a big right-wing guy back in 2017, is now one of these idiotic debunkers. They have no interest in determining truth. They only have interest in dropping studies on people until their opponent taps out, and then immediately shifting to moralizing. In the Southern debate against Hunter Avalon, which I highly do not recommend for anyone who's considering watching it, it's just a painfully bad stream. Southern basically tries to deep dive the articles, and Hunter immediately, all he does, he can't answer any of the methodological concerns. He can't answer any of the methodological approaches or the gaps in evidence that might be around. All he wants to do is to find one study that Lauren Southern does not have a critique about, and then just transfer to moralism. This is how a kindergartner thinks. I mean, maybe I'm being... Nobody after 5th grade should think like this about any academic topic. And if you do, at some level you must realize that you're part of an entertainment product and not actually a product to generate anything, any additional understanding. Obviously, my life's going through a lot of changes. It has been for 2 years now, and it's continuing apace. But I just don't want to be part of this infantilization of the internet. People are where they are, but watching 2016 political YouTube in juxtaposition with 2021 political YouTube, there's no way anybody on political YouTube can't have a creeping suspicion that they might be party to some kind of massive degeneration in human psychology over the last 2 years. And part of it's 2020. Don't get me wrong, 2020 was rough on everybody. But part of it is the kind of relationship we have with the internet. And to be quite honest, I want to break this. I think I kind of like the format where I'm talking to the chat, and I want to facilitate some kind of community online with people who are interested in the same ideas that I am. But at the same time, I need to break radically with the streamer format. And the only way I can do that right now, the only way I can figure out is to cancel super chats. If you want to donate me money, like $1 or $2 or something like that, you feel free to go to Entropy, put something in my tip jar, so on and so forth. But that's not how the conversation we're having right now evolves. The conversation we're having right now, it's a monologue, okay? It's a monologue. But it's a monologue that I want to put at the service of good faith actors here. Not at the service of any kind of monetary reward I could get at the end. And I don't know. I think that might be a better relationship. I don't need the money right now. Money is always helpful. But at this stage, I don't need the money. And I'd rather figure out this problem we have with the internet than possibly be party to this horrific phenomenon going on in LeftTube that I can't even begin to explain. I don't know. I mean, I know I mention this person all the time, but like, try to watch an hour of Demon Mama streams and try not to despair at the psychological state that people who are participating in this stuff for 8 hours must be involved in at some level. And I don't feel superior. I guess in some sense, I feel a desperate need to be somehow aloof from the phenomenon. But the feeling I feel is a certain sense of guilt, perhaps, that I might be doing something similar. And I don't want to do that. For a long time, I've struggled with how to create community online. And I don't know how to do this. I've learned a lot of lessons, I guess, about what not to do. The first lesson about what not to do, well, the first requirement, I should say, is that any kind of online community has to be built on a platform that you trust in order to keep you live enough. It also has to have strong leaders. The Cana Society was sort of the first iteration of this attempt, and we'll try to revive it. I'm sure of that. But the difficulty is that when I polled people, there's a lot of interest in some kind of community. As there always is, because as millennials, the thing that we're really lacking is community. And the one big asset we have over the previous generation is the internet. So why couldn't the internet be used to fill our community problem? Well, fair enough. But if you dump a bunch of people unmoderated into a chat, the difficulty is that the nature of chats themselves brings the worst people to the front. And so you have an unmoderated Telegram page, for instance. You leave it alone for 4 months, and you get people who are just endlessly moaning about, what are some useless conversations that come up in trad spheres? The JQ, obviously, that's a useless one. Which ethnic group is best? Brilliant. There's totally going to be a productive answer to that question that's going to help people. Who's a bigger Chad? And, don't forget my personal favorite, and people wonder why I don't care about this when it comes up online. Which denomination of Christianity is superior? Now, mind you, this is not a theological debate over whether man is saved by works or faith, or whether the Eucharist is actually the body and blood of Christ. That would be an interesting conversation. Not, in my opinion, a resolvable one in a Telegram feed, but that would be an interesting one. What they're basically trying to do is they're trying to figure out which denomination is the least leftist. This is a ridiculous question. And it should be all the more ridiculous if you're aware of any of the kinds of things people from either my videos or the NRX community generally typically talk about. While the origins of progressivism, I think, are quite easy to historically establish by looking at primary source documents and tracing it back. and here I'm going to explicitly leave out the denomination in question because I don't want to reinstigate this fight. The idea that the right denomination is somehow immune to progressive pressure at this stage, I think, should be insane. If your church is seemingly based, I congratulate you. You're either in possession, or I should say that, well, you are either in possession of a set of leaders at that church that are very, very strong and good at resisting the zeitgeist, or alternatively, your church is in a location that's not feeling the full force of the cathedral. Because there is no church in existence, I guarantee this, that is both feeling the full force of the progressive mainstream and is comprised of a bunch of leaders who are just going with the flow, who aren't actively working every day to prevent infiltration and co-opting of that institution. The only thing that we have at this stage as the right wing, the only thing that we have to rely on, in my opinion, is our own strength and our faith in God. It's one of the two. And I mean that strength both in the personal sense and the collective sense. So people here at some level, the only useful thing, the only good conversations I can provide in this space work at some point to providing more strength to you guys at some level. People have to get strong, or people have to put their faith in a higher power. There is no institutional drift online, and I don't even think there might be. I don't think there's even an institutional drift. Well, I mean, there might be in some churches, in some hinterland churches, there is an institutional drift that could carry you towards spirituality. But for the most part, the institutional drifts are either towards progressivism, towards degeneration, or the institutional drift is created by a certain group of strong individuals or the grace of God himself. Those are our options. Those are our options we have as a community. And if my interaction with the internet in a community sense is not helping you guys improve that, or perhaps even myself improve that in my own life, then what I am doing is grifting at some level. At some level, I'm just being a less degenerate version of Vosh. And the last thing I want to be is a less degenerate version than Vosh. That's the last thing I want to be. I want to do something diametrically opposed to what he's doing. And again, I don't have much of an answer for this. There's a reason why this isn't a diss dance. I didn't write this down beforehand. I'm literally just doing stream of consciousness at the screen right now and trying to figure it out in real time. The big problem with the initial Canon Society was that it was a bunch of people who wanted to be in a community, but other than the YouTubers, no one had a real good idea of what the community was for. Obviously, it was for content creation. That is one thing. But the problem is that the content creators were already spending most of their free time making content, myself included. So that, the idea that you would take an enormous amount of that time and essentially manage people online is kind of insane. It doesn't work properly. It doesn't. It's not. If you're a content creator, you want to be spending your time making content, not managing people online. Since anyone could join, and I didn't want to charge money for people to join because I thought that was ridiculously mercenary. But since it was more or less open, everyone got piled into the same chat. And of course, there were standards. That's fine. We needed them, right? Very stringent behavioral standards. So there would be none of the typical 4chan posting in any of our communities. At the same time, what happened is that you'd start off a meeting, right? And there would be essentially two content creators, and they would talk, and everyone else would listen. But again, the problem is that the content creators want to create content. And every single time we tried to get a pinch hitter or put someone else in a position where they were responsible for the streams, it immediately kind of went off the rails because people didn't really agree what the streams were for or what they should be doing. people agreed that they liked the content creators that were in alliance with each other. That was the agreement. People liked, Ghost of Buckley, or people liked the Distributist, or people liked Fritz Imperial, or whatever, right? People like those YouTubers, awesome, and that was a go. But beyond that, if it was just some random guy from Discord that no one knew about running a stream, what was the point? I don't think anyone really engaged with that, and inevitably people would get upset because someone would say something wrong. He would deviate from what we said in the initial documents, and so at the end of it, what happened is that an enormous number of documents were produced about what shouldn't be said or talked about, or what we weren't doing, or what our regulations were, and almost no output was ever really focused on. And this is sort of the conclusion that I have going forward. All communities online have to be focused on some kind of output. The reason why this YouTube channel succeeds is that I've lost time, but I haven't lost understanding that the point of a YouTube channel is to produce YouTube content. I hope it's going to be the best YouTube content that I can produce with the time that I have. Obviously, I have to balance live streams with writing and editing videos and all that stuff. And that waxes and wanes. Fair enough. But the point is not... The point of a YouTube channel is not to drive people to a Discord server or to a Telegram feed. It's to make content. And if a Telegram feed or a Discord server exists, everyone who's in that space has to have, in addition to a rules document telling them what they can't do, they have to have a mission statement telling them what they're all here to do. When you walk into a company board meeting, the CEO can exert a type of pressure by just, the CEO wouldn't talk to the board of directors this way, but say an executive meeting at a company, or the meeting of higher-ranking military officers. If things get out of hand and people get sidetracked, the job of the CEO is to ask, why are we here? It's no secret that one of my favorite scenes of all time is a scene from Margin Call. So that's a 2016 video. Let me just look it up here. It's a 2016... it's a 2011 movie. I apologize. And it's about it's about basically an 8-hour period during which Goldman Sachs, or a firm that's meant to look like Goldman Sachs, discovered that the housing market was massively overvalued, that the market was crashing, and decided to instantly sell off all their assets on the floor that day, completely screwing over all of their competitors so that they could survive. And the scene that I remember most, I think the scene that most people remember the most, is a scene between Jeremy Irons, who's famous from Brideshead Revisited, and Kevin Spacey, who is a total psychopath. But one thing that's good about the career of Kevin Spacey is that he played excellent psychopaths. Surprise, surprise. He was doing character acting lessons, apparently, for his entire mortal existence, and so he played psychopaths very well in these movies. And so again, this is a board of executives, and Jeremy Irons plays the CEO, the person, the ultimate sovereign of the corporation, the person where the buck stops. And Kevin Spacey plays the vice president in charge of the trading floor. So he's the guy who tells the guys on the floor what to sell, what to keep, what not, right? So he's a market expert. And Jeremy Irons' question's like, well, let's sell it all. Kevin Spacey says, well, we're going to destroy our relationships with our clients, we'll crash the market, and we'll be selling product to our competitors and our colleagues that we know has no value. Do you understand what we're doing? And Jeremy Irons says, do you understand what we're doing here? What are we doing here? And the answer is, they're there to make money, right? And it's so simple. It's so simple, right? But it's a brilliant scene because it shows you what the job of a CEO is. It's not to be smart, and Jeremy Irons literally says that a few sentences before that, the famous line that I love. But it so clarifies the CEO relationship because Kevin Spacey thinks that his job is to be the best damn stockbroker, well, day trader, I guess you could say, that you can be on the market. But that's not the job of the company. The job of the company is to make money, even if it means totally destroying everyone's reputation as a day trader. The problem with online communities is that if you're not just basically a giant fan club or a giant pit of toxic drama like most places on the left are, then you have to ask any given community what its goal is. Why are the people there? Why are the people there? What are they there to do? And if you don't have a very, very, very good answer to that question, then I don't think you have an online community. A few days ago, I was on a stream with Aaron McIntyre, who had a great lineup of Morgoth from Morgoth's Reviews, my friend Last Things, and I guess that was it, right? There were four of us, and myself, I should say. And we were discussing the book Dune. And one of the things that, I can't remember, I think this was Morgoth's idea, but this was an idea that we had discussed previously in the Cana Society. It's really a shame that we have to use other people's extended universes. A lot of people in reactionary movements love, for instance, Warhammer 40k. Anybody, I mean, you don't need a weatherman to tell you that Warhammer 40k is eventually going to become woke. Female Space Marines suck, but they're on their way, and they're going to destroy the lore of that entire universe. The Grim Darkness is not long for the 41st millennium. It's going to get sort of fluffy and empowering real soon. Real soon. I mean, they just can't say no to that, right? But as people who like this universe and who want to kind of, it sounds weird to say play in it, but we want to use it for our own projects, if nothing else for our own memes, if not for our own gaming experiences. The question is, well, why can't we design our own? There are a bunch of projects online where people are able to collectively create universes and operate within them. Why couldn't the right wing do something like that? That would be an output. Now, again, I think that brings up a problem because you could never design anything like that without having a set of very, very strong leaders that were very, very engaged. And while I certainly would be up for helping, I'm always very hesitant to start down a project like that, sort of creating a wiki open universe for developing new Gothic fiction or Gothic science fiction in. That would be sort of a shared universe and a shared language, a shared fictional language for allegories and memes. While it's very enticing to build that, I don't know if I have the bandwidth to attempt anything like that. And it seems like I would be better if I produced content rather than try to spin up a project like that. But that would be something, right? It would be things like that would have to be the motivating starting point for our interaction with any kind of online community. Because I'm convinced that there's just this natural degenerate quality. There's this natural degenerate quality to the online space as it exists currently. It's not just about there being no accountability, although there is real no accountability. It's the fact that short-term drama is always prioritized over long-term beauty. And the streaming phenomenon just illustrates this, absolutely. People who watch these streams understand many times that what their favorite streamer is doing is dishonest. But the sort of dopamine hit from getting the win and owning the chuds is worth more than actually understanding the realities of the political environment that we find ourselves in currently. That's the problem. You're never going to placate the mob better than a leftist. You're never going to flatter the ruling class better than a progressive can. That's why they're progressives, because they're good at flattering the mob and the ruling class. That's how the community is selected. And when a person like Vosh comes around, people who are natural flatterers understand that that if enough flatterers circle around a given creator, that becomes clout, and clout becomes power. But it can never become truth. Anyway, that's where I'm thinking right now. Someone's asking, what is a Chud? So a Chud is a name for a right-winger, usually someone from the distant right, so not sort of a Buckleyite right, but someone who's an unconventional right-winger. And I believe it is a parody of Chad. You know how back in the days of R the Red Pill, people said, well, the Virgin Chad meme was just the shit. Well, it turns out if you change one of the letters from A to U, it sounds like a stupid person, like Elmer Fudd. So the word Chud was born. Of course, this is used so literally as to be virtually meaningless. If there's no Chud kind of thing to say. That's sort of the thing, like Bugman, and I fully intend, I'm in the process of writing an essay on Bugman and trying to escape this. Bugman, I should say, is an insult that is directed at the kind of things the Bugman type does. E.g., the Bugman has no understanding of himself as part of a community, as part of a society, as part of a history. He only has identitarian relationships with consumer products, and he exists totally disconnected from any kind of past or future going through the entirety of existence. That's what Bugman means. You could use a different name for it, it will still mean the same thing. What does Chud mean? Nothing, really. Chud just means a person on the right wing who is stupid. So if you call a smart person a Chud, it doesn't really mean it. Just basically just explodes the entire identifier. So much of the leftist language is just a reframing of whoa. So I did turn off my super chats, but I noticed that the donations to my entropy have been working overtime since I've been on stream. So thank you very much for the donations, guys. But that being said, if the Google Super Chat wants to ask me a question, I fully intend to answer questions pro bono. This is not a completely transactional relationship. My goal here in doing all of this is to answer questions that I think will have good answers to them, right? If you ask me a Super Chat question that doesn't have like a really good answer to it, I'm not going to feel pressured to try to blather on about that or to extend it beyond what I could ordinarily give an answer to. And yeah, I think I'll say that. Okay. Now I'm kind of, yeah. So again, I'm experimenting with this format because they're not immediately super chats because they've been disabled. If you are using YouTube, you have to do the @reply to me, or I'm not going to even see it. Most likely, if the chat's going really fast, I'm not going to be able to do it anyway. I'm not going to be able to see it anyway necessarily, but at least I'll be able to see it above the ordinary chat flow, so to speak. Yeah, I'm so glad I disabled super chats. This is so much more of a chill environment. So this stream is not a full-on to stand stream. I intend it to go on for about 2 hours. So we'll end this at around 10:30. Okay, well, I don't think that I see Don the Pleb in the chat, but it doesn't seem like he's directing any questions towards me. Maybe he is. Maybe I just missed it. Oh, okay. 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 So let's do this. How am I going to do this? New format. I apologize for me just trying to figure this out in real time. This is why we're not doing this as a distant stream because. So, by the way, guys, all the non-distant streams are going to get sunsetted after a few months on the channel, meaning I'm going to put them on unlisted mode. I'll have a link to the unlisted videos in a variety of places if you want to see them, if you want to reference a video going back. But the point of these streams are not to be part of my public record saying anything. They're more or less just to communicate with anyone who wants to listen. Anyone who wants to share in my musings and go on from there. I've been considering taking this product and making it into a sort of a call-in show, and then have it go to an alternative channel. Just immediately flush it out of my, basically not even hosted on the main Distributist channel. But at the same time, increase community interaction and allow people to say their piece in a way that would be more amicable. The only difficulty, I think, is that I don't think that I'd be very good at showing people the door. In the Distant series, I had exactly one person successfully call into my stream. I used successfully lately because Skype was not working very well. And that person was a horrible person who I will never mention again on this channel. So, and I also let that person talk way too long, even though they had nothing to say and had no ideas. And to my knowledge, still have not had an idea 1 year later. Richard, so I'm just going to go through the paid. So this actually is hopefully going to work. Okay. So, yeah. So Entropy allows you to tip me, and I'll read the question attached to your tip. But please, guys, consider your tip a pure donation. It's not a payment for a certain amount of time hearing me talk about a topic. That has to be very, very clear here. This is a non-transactional relationship. I'll answer the questions insofar as I have something useful to say about the question being asked. Okay, so Richard RMWD. I'm also not... Here's another change in the format. I'm going to point out the fact that it's a paid chat, but I'm not going to list the monetary amount. All right? I'll thank you very deeply for any contribution you give me. But you know, keep it real, guys. Give the money you can give. If you want to, give me a tip. Purely discretional, right? I'll answer questions from the chat as I get to them. Okay, so let's go on. Let's hope this works. Fingers crossed. Richard, thanks for hopping on. I would love to hear you talk about your favorite artwork per period. Chronologically would be amazing, even if it was very casual. Well, okay, Richard. So this is something that I would need to pull. I saw this chat before I started. I don't have my favorite pieces of art organized by period. Since this was a donation with a suggested question, I think a much more productive question might be to talk about the periods of art and my opinions on them, at least the ones that come to mind. Okay, so let's just pull up the Wikipedia article here. Okay. This is such a high resolution that it's gonna be tough. I'll just talk about the painting styles that I really like. Obviously, the Italian Renaissance. What can be said about the Italian Renaissance? The problem is that it's just so highly praised that I'm not so sure. Like in the words of Titus Andronicus, who brings a flint to the flames of burning Troy? How can I praise the Italian Renaissance more than has already been praised or even necessarily come out with a great Italian Renaissance painter that I like more than the others. I can't say anything original about it. I just don't have anything original to say about it. It's great. It is in many ways the beginning of Western art. I will say, I mean, I don't think El Greco counts in that period, right? I think, was El Greco, was he Gothic? Was he before that? I forget. He was really early though. He was, yeah, that, well, anyway, I'll go on. The first school that I do have something to say about is the early Flemish paintings. My God, do I love the early Flemish masters. Such a breadth of human experience. It communicates, I don't know what about. It's so plain and confronting, and it's just, I don't know. I can't praise it enough. It is a little bit. I'll say this. I mean, and here I can actually list an artist that immediately leaps to mind when I think of the early Flemish paintings, and that's Roger van der Weyden. I mentioned, I mean, Christ Sent from the Cross is one example. Last time I mentioned the very, very famous The Last Judgment, which was the painting that apparently initiated Peter Hitchens' conversion to Christianity, so on and so forth. Yeah, that's the person I associate with this. It also communicates sort of the, I guess Bosch and Bruegel the Elder also classify, or also qualify. But it's just it's so raw. It's so raw. It feels like you could walk. First of all, it's not particularly representational. You'll notice immediately when you see one of these Flemish paintings that there is a lot of not quite anatomically correct proportions. But you can also tell that what you're seeing is a straight up depiction of how life was in the late part of the Middle Ages, right before the Reformation. And that's a reality that fascinates me. Since I have other chats, I just need to go through really quickly. Okay, hold on. Renaissance and Neoclassicism. Well, I don't know. I think I have less to say about Neoclassicism in terms of paintings. In terms of architecture, I have a lot to say about it. I love the Baroque style. A little less fond of classicalism. I don't know. I think moving on, I'll say Romanticism. As far as I'm concerned, amazing paintings. I love the Romantic paintings. As something that translates into our present world very well, I think a little bit of a red herring. And I anticipate people to ask me questions concerning that. Then we get into sort of the realist schools in the 19th century, and I'm on board again. I know that the Franklin in particular is very into the realist schools of the late 19th and early 20th centuries that were particularly popular in Northern European countries. And there was a revival of realism in the 1930s as well. I know this sort of edges into what a lot of right-wingers think is degenerate. I love Impressionism. Impressionism gets back to the reality of experience. Now, a while back, somebody sent me a photo of, it was a portrait, a picture, a piece of art. And this piece of art was of a Filipina girl and her grandmother. It was a beautiful scene. I believe that the grandmother was praying and the little girl was looking up to her. This obviously happened. I've seen it happen before in my own life. This is not a misrepresentation of reality. That's important to understand, right? So the criticism of Romanticism is that Romanticism isn't real. So the greatest critic of Romanticism is Agent Smith from The Matrix. Why does Romanticism ring hollow to older people? Well, it's the same reason why The Matrix, where everything is idealized, never works out. Because once you're older, you know that there isn't this romantic moment that your life gets to, or that people's lives ever get to. When you're a young man, especially if you're a young man, there's always this notion that you're going to get to this plateau, and then things will gel, and you'll have arrived, and then your life is going to take on the qualities of like a Star Trek movie, or maybe like a little less epic than that, like an episode of Dallas, maybe. As if anyone in this generation knows what Dallas is, but whatever. That's an impression a lot of young men get, and that's why Romanticism seems realistic. When you're older, you understand that even if great things happen to you, even if you're in a situation and you nail it, or you do something epic, or you obtain a certain level of achievement, or whatever, the next day you wake up and stub your head, you crash your car, you do something absolutely idiotic, you put your foot in your mouth, and you're a fool. And you realize that there is beauty in this world, there is heroism in this world, but it does not exist in the way that seems to be suggested by naive romanticism. And that is something that's why for a lot of people, romanticism, and especially for us in our cynical age, people see romanticism and they immediately try to reject it. And I love Thomas Cole. I love the pre-Raphaelites. Don't get me wrong. Like, amazing art. Not necessarily the greatest background art. I love that it exists. David Caspar Friedrichs is another one. Even the painting that I have in front of me now. I forget what artist this is. It is the funeral pyre of the poet Shelley. Classic example of, well, okay, this might be realism, but it depicts a romantic poet. Okay, so there's an element of that there. I love it, but I don't think it translates well into our age, and I think that it died a deserved death. Going on. Oh, but what I wanted to say is that so this painting this person sent me, an image of a young Filipina girl and her grandmother. This is a true to life event that happened, so it can't be accused of romanticism that this is impossibly epic. It's just a slice of life. There was one problem. The photo, it was good art. I would have praised an art student for doing it, and I thank the person for giving it to me. But the stylistic problem I had with that piece of art was that it felt like there was a photographer there shining light at the relevant, like literally like you had taken this tender moment of this Filipina girl and her grandmother and then put it inside some kind of like photo studio. And then like you had the light shining on the faces of the two characters, and then like you snapped it. And then like you got the photo, it was photorealistic, and then you sent it to Photoshop and took out like some cellulite here or there, and then, it gave it a more primary color scheme. That's what it felt like, because that's not how the scene would have existed, either in the natural light of the moment itself, if you were to walk in on these people. I imagine that the situations would have gone on would have been a lot darker, or it would have been a lot more washed out by the light of the day. Light is very, 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 I mean, you can see it right now, even right now. Like, you can literally see, if someone was to do a piece of art with my face right here, he would obviously capture the 5 o'clock shadow and the circles under my eyes because I didn't sleep very much last night, and the fact that I don't have a haircut. That would be part of the sort of a realistic picture of this, that it doesn't exist in such an idealized state. And so Impressionism really dealt with this fact. If you're being realistic, light is never perfectly shown. And if you're being impressionistic, what you're concerned with is not how it existed in the moment, but how it existed in the memory. Think of a fond memory that you have with your grandmother when you were 4. If you're like me, the images of that have this weird kind of fog around them. And it's funny because you say fog as sort of an analogy to what's actually going on, but it actually, when you try to imagine it, it literally does feel like there's kind of a fog around it. The details are hazy. it also seems more light than what you would ordinarily perceive in your adult mind. Impressionism tried to capture that. That, to me, is something that's really epic. That is trying to get behind people's eyes and succeeding is amazing, and I'll always love Impressionism for that. Okay, I'm just going to go through this quickly. Post-Impressionism. Art Nouveau. The Franklin discussed this. Art Nouveau is essentially trying... Art Nouveau did the best damn advertisements you ever seen. Alfonso Mucha... Now, one of the reasons why I'm not genuinely answering this it's not super chat question, is because I would reveal that my tastes are completely plebeian. But a good example of Art Nouveau is the artist Alfonso... Is it Alfonso Mucha? I think it's Alfonso Mucha. But Mucha is the artist, right? And he did just these epic advertisements, usually featuring impossibly beautiful women with impossibly long hair. And it was just delightful. But at the same time, kind of trivial, right? Art Nouveau is beautiful. It's indicative of a culture that understands beauty. But at the same time, you're kind of left wondering if there's a deeper point. This Art Nouveau culture is essentially reaching the height of its popularity just as Europe and the rest of Western civilization slides into a fratricidal war that will bring its entire aspirational side to its knees and doom all of its artistic and intellectual creations from that point forward to a slow degenerative process, a slow degenerative path to the state where we are now. I don't know. I appreciate it for what it is, but I think there's some limitation there. Okay, there's too many... Futurism, explicitly right-wing art, right? Anyone name a right-wing art school. Everyone says futurism is right-wing, and hey, not only is futurism right-wing, you can see the influences of Italian futurism on modern right-wing memes. In modern memes of things like vaporwave. That is a descendant of Italian futurism. I just don't like it. I tried. I'm sorry. Maybe I haven't seen the right futurism. But to me, it's not human enough. Art is about the human. Once you discard the human... Same thing with surrealism. I've seen some surreal pieces of art that I liked. Typically the movies more than the painted art. Boone Wells movies, The Exterminating Angel and The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. I know, pretty pleb take, but that's an example of surrealism in film. He was good friends with everyone's favorite surrealist artist, Salvador Dali. It's fun, limited. I think that has limited expansion possibilities. Abstract expressionism. This is what a lot of people hate. This is the little shapes, right? Little squares and stuff like that in a blank canvas. Abstract expressionism is sort of the height of everything people on the right wing hate in terms of art. I don't know. I appreciate it. I don't think it is... I think it's misused. It's misused. No one should ever get credit for painting a good abstract piece of art. They should get credit as a good art teacher. The point of an abstract piece of art is to be a cipher. It is to be a way of a viewer creatively struggling with something and then coming to their own conclusions about it. I would like abstract art to be used as more of a educational tool in developing one's imagination and less as something that's actually presented as beauty. I think once you have abstract art as a public installation, I think you've lost the point of abstract art. Because public installations are supposed to describe the community. But how can you describe a community with a piece of art that by definition is supposed to elicit a different response in every single person, like Rumi's elephant? It's stupid. In my mind, if you install abstract art as a public piece of art, you have literally made it into the fuck you that all right-wingers say abstract art is. One other school I'll mention is social. I group these two together: regionalism and social realism. Now, social realism gets a bad rap because it's propaganda art, so I'll leave that one aside. But in this country, there was sort of an equivalent called regionalism, which involved taking poor landscapes or working class landscapes and depicting them in sort of an impressionistic way. They would emphasize something about them that was unique. A good example of this would be from a few weeks ago when I had Return of the Prodigal Son by... I've already forgotten the author. I had three names. Sorry, guys. Return of the Prodigal Son. No, not the one by Rembrandt. Oh, God. Type regionalism in there, too. Hart Bentley, right? No, it's still... Is it Thomas Hart Bentley? That's it, right? Thomas Hart Bentley. But that's a good example of... I would think that a return to regionalism might be a very, very... that might be a very, very good avenue to come back to revisit for future art movements. Okay, so I spent way too long on that one question, so let me go ahead. Marco Pulio says, I have no idea how to answer that question. Sorry about that. Narco Republican, we want to give you money. You can't escape from... We want to give you money, Dave. You can't escape from that. Also, put the entropy link in the video description. It was hard to find. Is the entropy link not implicitly in the YouTube description? Okay, so at this point I'm going to take a break from reading the paid chats, or I should say the chats with tip donation attached. And I'm going to read something from Plebeian Media. He says, I think Dave is struggling with the premise that online communities that are wholly dedicated to God are not as successful as communal hobby type things. Not at all, Don the Pleb. I would be absolutely happy if the right wing could have a communal, hobby-based online community. I would rather have a communal hobby type video where right wingers got around and like just painted miniatures or played video games or something. Video games, I'm really tired of people streaming video games, but something else. I don't know. Practice instruments, paint landscape paintings in the regionalist style. Hold on, let me highlight this here. That I would rather have a community focused on that than I would have a community dedicated to being a community. That's the problem. A community dedicated to being a community and then policing people's conversations is not going to have... I mean, it's going to have life as long as the content creators that built it continuously give it life, continuously put energy into it. And that's not very reliable for right-wing content creators. Right-wing content creators are now increasingly having families. It's really difficult to make this a full-time position, especially now that you have all this banning going on. Yeah, I'll see if I think didn't Don the Pleb have another one here? Yeah, so I think I did mention, Don the Pleb also mentioned the religious issue. It seemed that the religious issue did frequently come up in most of the communities I was part of. I mean, I don't know, guys. I think the religious, if it's atheism versus non-atheism, as far as the right wing goes, I think it's pretty much open and shut. The facts as they are is that atheism is not some kind of stable ideology. It's not even just a lack of belief. It's essentially dedicating yourself to follow whatever the zeitgeist is, wherever it leads you, as is evidenced by most of the actual atheists. That doesn't mean that you have to believe in a religion or even God for that matter. And I don't think that, that's a reason to. You should not make God an instrument of a desire to escape degeneration. But at the same time, no one is arguing seriously on the right wing right now that if we just discard religion, we'll be based right wing atheists. There is no such thing as based right wing atheists. There might be based right wing ideologues whose ideology is not necessarily religious. And I think that's a possibility, maybe even a probability, considering that in Western history, there has always been a need to separate the political and religious projects going on in any given society. But as far as I'm concerned, on the utility of religion question, as far as right-wing internet goes, and I've never seen this successfully argued any other way, religion is a utility and needs to either be fixed or replaced in some way. Thank you, Narco-Republican. I will fix that. So this segues. So Nerve AMV Maker, for another generous tip, I'll say that. Thank you very much, Nerve AMV Maker. Your tips are always welcome. I know Nerve AMV Maker is a very good community member in the chat, and I always appreciate his questions. And it was not ever my intention to not answer Nerve AMV Maker's questions. Quite the contrary. I just want to separate the motivation to tip me from the question itself, if I possibly can. He asks, where do you think Romanticism went wrong? And where do you think Gothic genre improved it? To make sure we're on the same page, Romanticism would be Dumas, Walter Scott, and the fairy tales of Anderson and Grimm. Gothic would be Poe, Hawthorne, Shelley, the Bronte sisters, and the Dickens flirts. Who are the Dickens flirts? Oh, sorry. And Dickens flirts between the two of them. Well, Nerve and V-Maker, I don't exactly agree with your typology here. This might come down to, for me, Dickens falls squarely into realism. He is realism with a romantic aftertaste. Romanticism, a great ingredient, a shitty main course. That is my statement on romanticism. If you use romanticism as a tool in your story, that's great. But feeding me just romanticism is like feeding me a martini that is 100% vermouth. It is cloying, it is saccharine, and I want to spit it out. That is for the reason that I already specified here, is that my 30-something-year-old brain, like the humans locked into the idealistic matrix, is constantly saying, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie. So any message you have for me that shipped with hard romanticism is going to have a serious defect in it. Let me take on a few things that I do agree with in terms of the Gothicness. The Gothicness would be, Poe is kind of a fun writer. I wouldn't consider himself Gothic in the proper sense. A good example of this is Wuthering Heights is a classic Gothic rendition of the Romantic story. Another one would be Jane Austen, right? And I think Jane Austen is more or less in this tradition, although very few people would consider her to be a Gothic writer. I think that what you see in these authors is they're taking romantic motifs and they're incorporating a critique of the romanticism into their romantic story. It's a little bit meta, right? But what makes Jane Austen in something like Mansfield Park or Pride and Prejudice, what makes her not simply chick lit or bodice rippers written well and in a 19th century style is the fact that she's implicitly criticizing the romantic perceptions of people like Shelley inside her characters. There always is the kind of romantic that almost destroys their own life inside Jane Austen novels. Even though she kind of is writing a romantic novel herself, there's sort of a meta where they break the the fourth wall, so to speak, and point to Romanticism's defects, and then sort of use that to bring in a theme of realism and some a little bit of Gothicness too. Wuthering Heights is the same way. I've never read Wuthering Heights. Okay, I have listened to an audiobook rendition of it, and so I know the story and all this. I couldn't get through. Was it Emily Bronte or whatever? Charlotte Bronte? I forget. But it's the same sort of thing, right? It's, I mean, it falls right into the Gothic archetype. But I'll tell you what this is, and this is why I think Gothic Romanticism is superior to pure Romanticism, is that Gothic Romanticism always has as the height being some kind of great experience and catharsis felt by a hero in pain or undergoing some crisis. And that crisis is what frames the entire Gothic Romantic saga. This is easiest to see in American Gothic, specifically because people like Flannery O'Connor literally told us that this is what they were doing. They literally told us that they were framing everything around this cathartic religious moment of great pain and revelation. A good example of this is A Good Man's Hard to Find, where again, in a sort of break the fourth wall moment, the character literally tells you that at the end of the story. It's kind of on the nose, but still a very good story. A classic example of Gothic Romanticism. So, Gothic Romanticism, because of the fact that the supreme romantic moment is one of crisis and one of pain, it is able to draw on the broader human themes of tragedy and the deeper religious themes of Christianity. In some sense, in every truly deep Gothic romantic story, the implicit romance is the romantic quality of Christ's own passion, exhibited and imitated in imitation by the characters inside the pages. And that's what makes the Romanticism paired with either a Gothic or a realistic aspect hit so much harder and last so much longer than pure romanticism of the variety that was very popular early on, and that is seen over and over again inside anime. Good anime is tragic. There's a reason why Cowboy Bebop is... Okay, spoiler alert. There's a reason why Cowboy Bebop is still popular. And that was that the creator had guts to make it a tragedy. And the tragedy makes the rest of the show good. If it was just a romantic notion of like a space bounty hunter, I don't think it would really have the same weight. But thank you very much for the super chat. I'll just have to keep this going. Sam153. Hey Dave, summer is upon us and just curious on what you are expecting. A politically quiet summer? Will restrictions lift? I get the feeling that people are weary and just want to do things. Maybe that's just me. Yeah, I would expect a summer of slow decline, of creeping disintegration, but of overall uneventfulness. If this summer had a decade, it would be the late 19th century. The late 1970s. Why do you do this to me? Why do you do this to me, tongue? I've tried to train you for 4 years doing these live streams, and you just won't behave yourself. I should take elocution lessons if I had time to. Do they have lessons for that online? I think I would be able to. Get a better voice if I did that, right? But think of the late 1970s. What do you think about in the late 1970s? America adrift, America in decline. Why isn't this selecting? America adrift, America in decline. Pardon me. I need to figure out why My highlighting button is not working on my OBS. Oh, I can't figure this out. I'm sorry, guys. I guess Entropy does not register this as an actual chat. Okay, guys. In the future, next time I'm going to have the donation chats on a separate side window. I don't know why they're not highlighting, but it is what it is. But when you think about the late 1970s, you think of America adrift, America in decline, a slow disintegration of social movements, and a general decline in quality of life, and a huge increase in crime. But you also think of kind of like a pretty good time, kind of like, we're degenerating in style, a little bit of style, a little bit of disco, some pretty good bands still on their heyday, right? Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti coming out at that time, I think. Things are, on the entertainment front, I think a pretty comfortable existence, but one where there's this sort of looming problem, this looming unresolved dialectic that's constantly lurking in the background. I really love this meme, White Boy Summer. Again, since we can't do anything else, calling back to sort of the summers of the 80s and 90s, nostalgically, I think that's a good meme because it captures where people are. People know that nothing we're doing right now is sustainable. They know that we have some big crisis looming in the future, but they want to get this little gasp of air before things start in earnest. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I think we should be preparing for the future. You should have an ant-like mentality, but there's no problem in letting yourself take a few moments of being a grasshopper along the way, especially if you can make some friends. I wouldn't expect any crises, though, I don't know. Who knows, right? Who knows? I'm just guessing. But my instinct is that the crises are all going to kick in like more towards the end of summer, beginning of fall. The fact that we're even worried about the Middle East indicates that even if the elites are dealing with crises, they don't really want any of us to be paying attention to them. Because what American honestly really cares about, the Israel versus Palestine conflict, Israel's not going anywhere. This is political theater, even in Israel and Palestine. So it's not even our own political kabuki theater. It's their political kabuki theater. I don't know. Someone can explain to me why I should care about Israel or Palestine, either one of them, other than how they're being used as a distraction for the very pertinent question of who actually rules the West and who has stakes in the rulership of said Western countries. Yeah, and someone's saying that we fund both sides. Yeah, we fund both sides. If I cared deeply, if I, as a person, cared deeply for every cause that the cathedral funded both sides of, I would care about everything. Because every modern political conflict, the cathedral funds both sides. That's why this moment we're in is so sort of transparently ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense. Aristocratic Owl. Do you think the distant right needs leaders that follow in the footsteps of very successful leaders? I'm thinking people like Napoleon or Alexander Hamilton. From Yarvin's perspective, it would seem like we need practical men like those men. Well, if you have a Napoleon or a Julius Caesar, you certainly don't need my help. A Napoleon or a Julius Caesar just goes straight for the jugular. The cathedral has a bunch of jugulars. It has a bunch of arterial veins that if you take control of them and destroy them, the cathedral will, the mainstream establishment will bleed out and die. None of these institutions are at all reachable from my own analysis of it, and I went through an entire analysis of it in a video because I was tired of answering a question. But I think that's that if you're a Napoleon or a Caesar, you don't need my help. You don't need my help. I probably could help you by acknowledging you as the de facto and therefore the de jure government, and applauding any efforts you have at rolling back the human degeneration that we've experienced over the last 20 years. I would love that. And by human degeneration, I mean what we see on the internet. I mean what we see on Twitter every day. I don't mean physical. I don't mean any kind of... I'm not even going to mention what people are probably going to interpret that as. It's just... Yeah. I just mean the cultural degeneration that's creeping into every one of our lives and increasingly affecting our lives and making them less healthy. Alexander Hamilton is really, you add Alexander Hamilton and George Washington together and you get American Napoleon. So what you really mean by Alexander Hamilton is George Washington plus Alexander Hamilton. Because without George Washington, Alexander Hamilton doesn't work. And without Alexander Hamilton, George Washington doesn't work. George Washington was the strategist, the noble military personality, and Hamilton was the visionary that provided the notion of what America would look like as one country and not as a squabbling variety of states, each trying to colonize the North American continent in rivalry with each other. I think we need great men, but I'm kind of looking for a Boethius. I'm kind of looking for smaller people, maybe a Clovis here and there. I am not convinced that we are in this Caesarian moment. I'm kind of convinced that we're in a Diocletian moment, for those who are catching. Diocletian was the last eruption of Roman unity, also coincidentally the last eruption of Christian persecution, before the Roman Empire set into sort of its official decline state and began tearing itself apart officially. Diocletian was the last Roman Empire that tried to maintain the illusion that Rome was going strong and was the same Rome that Augustus had control over. Very unsuccessfully, I think. But I would say that as a Christian, wouldn't I? Society Man says, anything that distances you from Vosh can only be good. Yes. Bosch is a train to nowhere. It's a train to nowhere for the left as well. That cannot go anywhere. I mean, okay, we know where the Vosch train leads. And it's Demon Mama. It's people literally acting out what appear to be borderline personality disorder crises or bipolar crises in real time on camera. Obviously, Vosh is just your standard issue grifter. But when I see people in the Demon Mama circle, I'm only reminded of one thing, and that's a person experiencing a manic episode. And people are super chatting that. People are super chatting someone that seems to be in some kind of manic episode. I don't know. That is where the Vosh train leads. And it shouldn't even be called the Vosh train. It should be called the Destiny train, because he's the one who built it. And although Destiny is way smarter than all of his clones, and he can see how this isn't a good end that he's procured, they're using his code. They're using his copy pasta. I don't know. Maybe Destiny. Now this would be a funny reenactment. Let's redo Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but Vosh is the monster and Destiny is Dr. Frankenstein, and it plays out climactically with Vosh and Destiny battling it out on an ice floe after Destiny refused to build the monster Vosh a mate, and they each kill each other. That would be a remake I would pay to see on YouTube. Dragon Groper, hey Dave, just wanted to say I found you back when you were a 2,000 sub YouTuber and enjoyed every video. You handed me my first red pills and saved me from the normie cons like Shapiro and French, who saw who I saw only as the only alternative to shitlibism. If nothing else, you saved one person. Thank you. Well, I'm not. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the kind words. I always blush when people praise me, and it kind of gets me nervous, which is why I always tell people to stop it. But thank you very much for the kind words. I really appreciate it. One thing I want to tell you, I'm not going anywhere if I can possibly help it, unless I literally am in danger of losing my day job over this channel, then I'll try to do something. I don't know what. Obviously, there's no hope in what's on the internet's on there forever. So there's no hope in just destroying the channel and hoping that no one notices. That's never going to work, right? But I mean, maybe I'll have to do something radical and I'll disappear for a while or whatever, right? If I feel that there's a lot of heat on me or something like that. But my intention is not to go anywhere. I would say that I stand by. I may have had second thoughts on a lot of early videos in terms of how deep the problem went, but I think I stand behind almost everything I've ever said in terms of the broader critiques. The one thing I would say is that I think that we just need to be in a mode of imagination. Like, I'm actually in an optimistic mode. What is the biggest flaw of the streamers? The biggest flaw is that they have no imagination. It's the biggest flaw of the progressives too. I talk to progressives and I take this tact to progressives that I notice people like my friend the Franklin. He does this too. And anyone who comes from a deeply blue area, they either do this because they heard of someone else doing this, or they do this because they're forced to do this out of necessity. You become this sort of tactical Socratic where you just ask people questions like, well, what do you think about this? And then they answer your question and you're going, oh, what do you think about that? And you kind of lead them along. Is that really what's going on? They say something like, well, it's been proven that transgender women will have no advantage in women's sports. And you're like, really? It's been proven that, okay, yeah, maybe that's been proven. Are you sure it's been proven? Like, you're really convinced? And that's as much as you get towards ever disagreeing with them, because you know that if you disagree with them explicitly, or if you make your questioning, I guess that I kind of treated a little bit close to a pointed question on that last one, but if you ever show your power level, they'll just immediately cut you off. So you do a lot of that. And what I've noticed talking to progressives in my real life is they have just no imagination. They can't entertain the possibility that things might go south, that trusted institutions might not be as trustworthy as they initially thought. And what's more important, they can't imagine the administration doing anything differently than what it's already doing. Right? They can't imagine doing anything than what it's already doing. It's amazing. Like, there's no political... What's so funny is that there is no political dialectic as far as progressives are... The only question is whether they're doing it enough. So global warming, the way that Joe Biden has conceptualized the problem, like I always say with global warming, my issue is not with... Well, my issue is somewhat with some of the facts, some very, very minor facts at the peripheries of this issue. None of the major claims. But I don't like how the issue is being framed, and I don't like how the engineering problem is being confronted. It's being confronted in a way that maximizes the amount of political struggle and minimizes the amount of compromise. So the thing is that I lost my train of thought there. I need to recover it. The progressives, they don't know, they cannot imagine a way of reframing the problems differently than the Joe Biden administration already has done. So Joe Biden frames Black Lives Matter as a question over how do we get rid of white racism in white people's hearts. That's the framing of Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protesters in 2020 and the subsequent crime spike. That's the only framing they can imagine. Any other framing is a Nazi or something like that. The only framing of the global warming crisis, loosely, I use the word loosely, is how can we get the international community ultimate controls over carbon regulation, and how do we enact initially draconian laws to curb Western consumption habits? That's the only way they can frame the question. Any other framings about immigration or Western lifestyles going more back to the land, which would be a right wing position, a right wing solution to this problem, all of those questions, they can't, it's not that they don't agree with them. They can't imagine a good faith approach to these questions. So if you advance those questions, they will perceive this as a moral attack on their dignity. The most valuable weapon we have as non-progressives is our imagination. Keep that fresh. Keep that fresh. Imagine, don't betray your morals. Don't betray your principles. Don't betray your core understanding of what a good human life is. But never try to box your way into the methodology to achieve that real human life. Never think that country borders have to be in a certain way, or that ethnic groups have to be in a certain configuration. Ethnic groups could fall apart, and entirely a new set of ethnic groups could emerge with the lines in different places. I'm sure there would be a lot of correlation, but that's happened many times in human history. One of the problems with the alt-right was it was just it had a huge problem with imagination. The only thing it could imagine doing is restoring the old world that had essentially died in World War I. It didn't go like, okay, what was good about the old world? Now how do we make a new world that has more things like this? That's the question. Not how do we restore an old world. That world is dead forever. But it's how do we build a new one that's more like this than like what we have right now. And it's going to be increasingly interesting in 2022 or 2024. By that time, all trends will have progressed so far that if you don't want to participate in an artistic project that is not like Steven Universe or ContraPoints, or have a dialectic that's not like Vosh, then you're going to be implicitly hearkening back to a past halcyon bygone age that will no longer be able to be returned to us. The past is dead, it will never return, but for the love of goodness, I hope there is something more than just this one unimaginative progressive direction. There's got to be more than one direction to go in. And that's just the desperation of our age. It's not even that I disagree with progressivism. It's that it's only one thing. It's one track, and the only thing you get to decide is how fast you go on this track. That's the only thing progressives can ever disagree with. The only thing that Bosch and Joe Biden agree on is how fast to go in one common direction towards fully luxury gay-space communism. That's it. The speed's the only thing they disagree on. Anyway, Society Man says, oh, this is so funny. I turned off super chats and I got entropy donations that are taking up all of my time, and I'm hardly getting to any of the free stuff. Don't make me disable entropy chats. Okay, I'm not quite ready to disable entropy chats because I really appreciate entropy as a company. I'm a person who believes in patronizing local businesses, and so I am, everyone knows that my big vice is board games and nerdy card games and stuff like that, and that's my big vice. It's probably not my only vice. Well, definitely not my only vice, but it's definitely the one that I think is the most the most bugman part of me, kind of. But one thing I do like is that I always have a great relationship with my local board game store and my local bookstore. And I always, when I ever go there, I always want to try to buy something, like even if it's just a $5 thing, just to help support them, right? And I always chat with them about what new things they're doing and how their business is doing and and what they're planning. Even though for the last year, it's basically me just swinging by, picking up something, and then chatting with them for 20 minutes. I like that relationship, and I feel like I have that relationship with entropy, where if people really want to give me donations, I actually like the fact that they're making this business model work, for a small portion of that. So, anyway. Okay, I'm sorry. I completely digressed from my initial question. Society, ma'am. Are memes a form of contemporary folk art for people who are otherwise disconnected from any sort of history or community? Or is folk art even possible in online spaces? Well, I mean, the problem with memes, at least right-wing memes, is that they are art. It's okay to be white is, in my opinion, one of the most hilarious pieces of guerrilla folk art that we've had in recent memory. Is really interesting. The problem was the promise of memes was that they would turn into something that was more than memes. And the thing is that this is what right wingers always do because they're trying to copy the left. They build their communities to be like a mile wide and an inch deep, when what they really should be trying to do is build their communities an inch wide and a mile deep. Maybe you're missing the analogy, but what essentially all of these initial right-wing memes contributed to was a community of minimal investment people, sort of the opposite of academic agents tens, hanging out online on platforms where they were basically being used as fodder for the left to encourage its own activist class. And basically, they were only waiting around to get banned. Once Joe Biden was successfully sworn in, the usefulness of keeping a lot of these incriminating accounts around became meaningless, and they were summarily destroyed. I think the closest thing to folk art, and I'm horribly unoriginal, one trick pony today, the closest thing I think to folk art that I've seen was something like SCP, sort of maybe a collective fiction project. SCP is a great example of culture that is an inch wide and a mile deep. A well-developed YouTube channel is something that can be very, very deep. I always thought, who knows? At some point, maybe when my children are older, well, my child, God willing children, is older, I intend to get back into folk music. I have just this creeping suspicion and fear that folk music is entirely taken over by progressives. That the trends that I saw when I was still very much involved in it in 2015 have only gotten worse, and now it's just a complete disaster. I think there is room for... But of course, that's very IRL, so I'm not even answering the question. I don't know, Society Man. This is an excellent question, but I'm just going to have to admit that I don't have an answer for this right now. Thank you for the contribution, but I'm not going to try to insult the question and try to spitball something just to give you your money's worth, so I think I'll move on in the spirit of the new attitude. Sam says, I liked your thoughts on summer. Cheers. Thank you very much. Aristocratic Owl says, sorry to bring this comment up, but I do have a strong feeling inside that the distant right needs to do something politically, and that America has radically and hastily needs a different direction, or it will be doomed for the entire body politic and the shareholders of the company. Okay, Aristocratic Owl, I agree with you. It's not that I couldn't come up with an agenda for Caesar that took absolute power at the top level. I just can't see how the amount of power we have is anything close to the amount of power required to do what you're insinuating needs to be done. Yeah, I mean, right, as a right winger, I could come up with an entire plan that wouldn't hurt a hair off of anyone's head, that could fix 90% of the problems in this country and would probably save a lot of lives if you had, 100% or near 100% of the power, or the amount of power that progressives, I guess it's, the amount of power that the progressive wing has to enact their ideas. The problem is, I mean, in the words of Scotty from Star Trek: The Original Series, I'm sorry, Captain, we just don't have the power. We just don't have the power to break the gravitational pull. So maybe something changes, right? Unlike gravity, what's tugging us down is not a constant. That could change, and we could break into orbit again, or we could make an impact that way. But under the present conditions, walk me through it. I mean, I know Don the Pleb's in the plat right now. Don the Pleb is in the chat right now. He's welcome to come on and do a follow-up stream. I'll tell you what we're talking in the follow-up stream. Not tactics, not tactics, and not tactics. We're not talking about tactics. I understand that there are countless things you can do to get from point A to point B and look like in that little movement you've made progress. The problem is that there's a lack of a strategy that will work. In the words of Don the Pleb himself, you can do things, but they're just not ultimately worth it. So I want an explanation of how the things that an activist class would do, given a realistic assessment of the power we have or could have, could actually be worth it. There's one exception I have to this rule, and I'll try to talk about this a little bit in the future. The exception to this rule is if the right-wing coalition was completely disbanded and a new coalition was formed that had way more political support. Say, for instance, if the coalitions formed more along the lines of Asians, Hispanics, and working class whites against elite whites and the client groups of elite whites. That political dynamic would give a new right-wing push a lot more power. It still wouldn't solve the fundamental problem with the institution still being arrayed against us. But at least that would not be a joke. The present right coalition is a joke. It's a joke because it was weak in 1984, and it's gotten weaker every year since 1984. I named 1984 as the high point with Reagan's win against Mondale. It's gotten weaker every year since 1984 until where it is now. And no one in the elite can even imagine it getting more powerful in its present form. So to everyone who wants to have a political execution, it's a joke. People in the Bay Area laugh about this, and they have a right to laugh about this. They have a right to laugh about this because it's a weak person saying it's going to beat the shit out of you, and they know you can't. It's like a chihuahua yapping. They could crush you at any moment they wanted to. Traveler for USA, $5. Where do I go as an unmoored atheist Israeli Jew? I don't feel much connection to my heritage or ancestral religion. I recognize as true most of the points made by the dissident right. How do I proceed from that? Where to? Well, at the risk of, sorry for the chair creaks, so if you disagree with all the points on the dissident right, and no, this is a diverse community, you will know that a very based country for both your ethnicity and your religion is Israel, right? I mean, they are your people. I don't know. You're not. There are Israel is ruled by a right wing nationalist leader. Israel religious politics and Israeli cultural politics are ruled by traditionalists. There's a huge traditionalist coalition there. What do you expect to get as an alien in another culture? I mean, what would you expect, right? I mean, I mean, I mean, obviously, cordiality, certainly. You'll always be accepted as a friend. But I mean, if you want to be like, well, I have some minor disagreement with my own people, therefore, when I go to other groups, they should accommodate me to the extent that my own people wouldn't. I mean, that's a tall order, and it would seem to court the same mistakes that previous generations of secular Israeli Americans made, and previous generations of traditionalist Christian Americans made when they joined an alliance with those people. There would be a similar problem there that I foresee. There are Israelis that are doing great work, most notably among them Yoram Harzoni, who seems to be learning a lot of the lessons. As far as I can figure out, Harzoni is 100% an Orthodox Jew and an Israeli nationalist. And if I had a country for my own, if I had a country like Israel, who is looking at politics like Israel looks at politics, I don't know how many things I'd really have to complain about, to be quite honest. I really don't. To harp on the previous chat's questions, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be deep cultural problems. Every person, even Israelis, are deeply struggling against the problems of modernity. And that is the true enemy. The struggle against the internal bugman. That is the enemy, the degenerative nature of modernity itself. And potentially the eventual evolution of that into AI. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm not willing to take on Roko's basilisk just yet. And if we can't defeat the cathedral, we're sure as hell not going to defeat the basilisk. Right? That is the struggle, right? So I'm not saying that like Israelis have everything figured out. There's something for a right-winger to do in Israel. But the elite class in Israel is at least not actively making things worse for itself. And so the immediacy, the sort of problems that Aristocratic Owl is talking about are just not problems in Israel. There is not a skin in the game problem in Israel, as far as I can tell. There's not a misunderstanding about who the stakeholders are of the Jewish state. It might be in the name. But there's no mystery of that, right? That's a problem that we have. Our governments do not see the citizens of their own country as the primary stakeholders in that country's administration, either on a domestic or an international level. And that's what makes our particular problems so immediate. Aristocratic Owl, I try not to read the amounts. Aristocratic Owl, how do you think the right can bring back spirituality to such a spiritually decadent world? Also, I enjoy supporting you. You are the very few people who I want to donate money to. Thank you very much, Aristocratic Owl. I'm fair enough. I just hope that I'm always delivering to you enough content to justify your contribution. And hey, if nothing else, at least you're helping the good people at Entropy maintain online dialectics in a way that I think I have no problems supporting Entropy. And as long as we don't see this relationship as transactional, I'm perfectly fine. Spirituality is brought about by strong spiritual leaders. If you're a Catholic, you can see this. And if you're an evangelical, you can see this. Evangelicals, tell me if you do not recognize this scenario. Languishing church with a bunch of old people. Vibrant religious leader with a strong vision of the holy comes into the fore. He speaks well, he talks well, he gets people excited. Church thrives for 15 years. Person moves away, dies, retires, or gets hit by a scandal. Church dies. 5 points. And of course, since the church is entirely built around that leader, it has something to fall back on. That was the story of Mars Hill Church. And that's to a lesser extent the story of a lot of Catholic parishes. They have great priests. They thrive. Young people show up. A community is forged. In the Catholic Church, usually those priests get transferred away because that's what the Catholic Church does, even with really, really amazing priests. They try to spread their game around. I'm not so sure that's the right strategy. But I'm not so sure that's the right strategy, but that's what they do. Once the priest's gone, the parish community has an entropy death. I don't think that any community is stronger than the leaders who are leading that community. If we want to have a spiritual renewal, we'll need to find strong spiritual leaders. And I don't know. I think I can imagine that happening in the Catholic Church. But in the Catholic Church, it's gotta be lay people. It's got to be lay people. There's got to be strong lay people. It can't be like, oh man, once upon a time, we had this total living saint of a priest at our parish, and our parish thrived, but then, he moved to New Jersey or Vancouver, and then, it's never been the same since. That can't be the case. It has to be, well, there's this really great priest, and he made our parish, and then these other people made it their parish. These other lay people took control of their community. And, we have kind of a sleepier priest. He's an older guy, but he provides the sacramental force that we need. And in the meantime, it's in good hands from a secular perspective. I think that would have to be an attitude change inside the church itself. In some sense, though, aristocratic owl, I think that there's going to be an opportunity there is an opportunity emerging right now, post-COVID. This is the twilight of the boomers. Millennials need to step up and become the leaders. And we need to be aristocratic. Put your community before yourself and make sure that your community delivers on its purpose. You can't have one without the other when it comes to that, right? And I think the new millennials will have a damn good chance of becoming new great leaders. And with that comes spirituality. Traveler. I didn't necessarily mean migration. From where I'm looking at, Israel is already pretty subverted too. I'm not so sure what to do about feeling like an outsider in the only place where I'm supposed to belong. Thank you for your answer regardless. But isn't most of Israel's population growth coming internally from Orthodox Jews? Maybe you're experiencing a problem that I'm not quite aware of. But if most of your population growth is coming from Orthodox Jews inside your own country, how is modernity overpowering the demographic force? Are you saying that modernity is so powerful that even with the demographics flowing in favor of the right wing, it's still not enough to overcome modernity? That's a little grim, I'm not going to lie. Maybe Yarvin's idea that America has to fall before we get any actually new ideas has to happen. But even if that was a necessary step in the process, I think I don't know. I don't think you're not. I mean, I'm sorry, traveler. You have the best chance to fix this problem. It's not going to get better uh, inside a Gentile community. I mean, even in necessarily. I mean, if you're a Jew that feels this way, or if you're a person of the Jewish faith that feels this way, uh, and you move to a Christian community, you're literally pulling the Texas California game. It's not a long term solution for anybody. No, I want to help you as much as I can. I want to make the project of a modernity resistant human as much of a reality. Well, obviously, I'm a Gentile, so but we're in this together, right? Modernity resistant humanity needs to be a thing for either group to survive, right? I want to help, but I can't imagine how you're not getting the most bang for your buck in your own community, even if the problem isn't solved in your community. And I'm struggling with getting a better answer than that. I really am. Dragon Graper, Nick Fuentes agreed to a stream debate with you. Some super chatters name drop you. I imagine a conversation about parallelism versus political activism. Any idea about how or when that might be set up? Oh, just ping me. Just ping me, and I will. I will. I will definitely. Okay, but please, a moderated discussion would be what I would prefer. If we need moderation, a moderated discussion. Usually, I don't like moderators at all, and I don't like debates at all. But this is a right on right conversation. This is a dialectic, not a debate. I'm not trying to make Nick look stupid. I'm not trying to make myself look smart. Maybe a moderator that would help us, help one of us not interrupt the other, because I'm sure that will be a temptation. That would be good, and maybe keep on top of times. Aristocratic Owl, you asked me a question that I don't really have, but the answer, that answer, Dragon Gripper, is yes, certainly. I'm willing to have a conversation with Nick. I think the prior conversation. I mean, I'm going to be asking him the same questions that I've put in my letter to right wing activists. I'm going to ask him the same questions that I put to Don the Pleb. What's the strategy? Like, not what's the tactic. Not how do I make Nick Fuentes the next senator of Wyoming. Not how do I make Nick Fuentes the right-wing equivalent of Vosh. Right-wing equivalent of Vosh is not an achievement, in my point of view. Not an achievement at all. It's the worst possible thing I could ever fear. In some sense, we already got that with Andy Worski, so good riddance to bad rubbish, in my opinion. Not that I appreciated having that tool handed over to the enemy, but I guess the silver lining for having the ring of power flow out of the fingers of Gondor is at least Gondor wasn't corrupted by the ring of power. But my end goal is not a new right-wing senator of a red state, or a new YouTube phenomenon that can get tons of money. I don't know what would the point of that be. As for, I mean, if this just comes down to like, oh, well, we'll pressure Republicans to push back, that might be something we can talk about, right? Like that kind of like, well, we can buy you time. I get it. I'm in the time market. You want to buy me time? Buy time away. But if your tactic is I buy you time, then I want to know what the eventual plan is going to be. Is it parallelism? It's parallelism, right? In which case, we're just doing the same thing from different ends. I met my time, and all I got through was the paid chats. So from that perspective, this is a total failure, but I love you guys, and I'll go on for 10 more minutes. I want to keep this at a hard 2 hours. I really do. Obviously, not a hard 2 hours because I'm going over time now. But Aristocratic Owl asks, what are my thoughts on E. E. Cummings? So this is the problem with E. E. Cummings, is I only know him as a children's poet. Unlike T.S. Eliot, who, I used to hate him and now I like him, and I find him challenging and evocative and all this stuff. Whenever I hear the name E. E. Cummings, I think of the little gimmick poems he wrote, where it was E. E. Cummings was the first sort of meme poet, so to speak. He had this series of children poems that were hypothetically written by, I think, a flea. It was a flea character who wrote the poems, and in the canon of this meme universe, the flea would write this poem by hopping from key to key on a typewriter. As not only would he write poems from the perspective of a flea, aka with everything being giant, he would also do correspondence with his children fans, and nothing would be capitalized. Because, of course, you couldn't hold the carriage shift, even on a mechanical typewriter, as a flea jumping from key to key. Very cute. But I'm afraid, Aristocratic Owl, I am woefully undereducated about the serious career of E. E. Cummings. But he was very cute. Maybe he has sort of some kind of meme way of writing poetry. I guess I sort of alluded to it with this whole cockroach cockroach shtick. That's one way, that I'm a Gentile, is I can't get the Yiddish. I can't do it. It's beyond me. So Dog Pine Tree, I remember you asking this before. Are you familiar with the filmography of Lars von Trier? His work seems implicitly reactionary. Yeah, it is. I love Lars von Trier, actually. I love Lars von Trier. It is implicitly reactionary. It's horribly cynical. Lars von Trier is a pessimist that makes me look like Steve Turley. Also known as Steve Turkey by some people on the distant right. He's so pessimistic and so misanthropic that I find him to be... He has his moments, and one of my favorite movies of all time will forever be Dancer in the Dark. Probably the first and last film that the Icelandic folk rock superstar Björk ever should star in. But it's truly one of my favorite movies. Also, a nice little hypothetical view into Washington State in the 1950s. I appreciate that. I appreciate Dogville. I appreciate I particularly appreciated Melancholia, which I really thoroughly enjoyed, especially when watched in parallel with what's his face, Days of Heaven director. Oh God, I forget the guy who did Days of Heaven. The guy who did Days of Heaven had a film called Tree of Life, which came out in short proximity to Melancholia, and they almost felt like sister pieces in the same way that Last Things pointed out that A Quiet Place and Birdcage were sister pieces in many ways. But I don't know. There has to be something beyond just misanthropy. Reaction cannot just be a misanthropy of screw it, bring on the basilisk. Landianism is not... Although Land is a genius, and nothing like Vosh, I would be highly unhappy if the product of a distant right is for us all to become Landians who are so eager to bring about the end of our current establishment that we essentially hand power over to a series of artificial intelligences and corporate super despots. I don't think that is... I think the path, and I know that this is an underdeveloped idea, the path has got to be through folkways. The internet should be a folkway. The internet should be a folk culture. The internet should be a place where you come to be more embodied. It's a more engaging activity than television ever was, isn't it? But how come, even though we're more doing human stuff on the internet, how come the internet is supremely disembodying? Yeah, I have no idea. I can't answer this question. As an engineer, I think there's an engineering solution, but I can't fix it. And I just don't... Oh, that's it. Sorry. The director who did Tree of Life is Terrence Malick. Right? Yes, Terrence Malick. And Terrence Malick does get on my nerves. His last video about a dissenter in Nazi Germany, while beautiful in a lot of ways, epically got on my nerves. And it was the timing I saw that video. I had recorded my father's autobiography, basically interviews with him, about what life was like as a peasant, a German peasant in Eastern Europe. And anyone who thinks that there was a very clear moral dilemma in that battle, I don't think was doing proper respect to the time period. And I went right from that to watching Terrence Malick's take on it, which of course is Christian, somewhat moralizing, beautiful, but still somewhat moralizing. And I felt that it was a little bit cheap in that dimension. As a neo-reactionary blogger put it, when you fought in World War II, you were either on Team Hitler or Team Stalin. Could you really fault anyone for picking the wrong side in that battle? I can't. And in the meantime, because that's all you knew when the war started, right? And in the meantime, if we're giving write-offs for people who were following Team Stalin, I don't see why the write-offs don't morally apply to the other side. And if we're all supreme moralists who are just so in tune with the natural spiritual reality of the world, as is implied in every single Terrence Malick movie, I wish that our perspective on moral guilt would be a little bit equally God's eye as Terrence Malick cinematography is God's eye. Now, I notice that none of those words are going to make... For anyone who's not a Terrence Malick fan, everything that I just said is going to be complete hogwash. But suffice to say, Terrence Malick is one director who's made the same movie like 20 times since 1977. That movie is Days of Heaven. That movie is Tree of Life. That movie is Thin Red Line, etc., rinse and repeat. The only reason why I like him is that movie is a good movie. And that movie it reminds us of something that humans can never stop forgetting, which is the total immanence of a transcendent God. I don't know how to say this in any more emphatic way. That's the only message of any Terrence Malick movie, is that a completely transcendent God is 100% immanent, and we just can't see it. I spoiled every single Terrence Malick movie for you. If you want to see a movie that communicates that through beautiful cinematography while letting the plot completely languish on the wayside, pick up Days of Heaven or Tree of Life, which I think are the two best ones. Thin Red Line might be a third way down there. But, yeah, that's my best guess. At any rate, guys, considering that this is not a full Disdance stream, I'm going to be ending it here. Thank you very much for the donations. Again, no obligation on either side. Next time, maybe if I don't get quite so many donations, I'll read from the chat itself. but at least this is a 100% Google can't profit from this stream. And even if I'm getting my money from Entropy and therefore not really doing anything different from Vosh, at least I've taken, in the same way that I'm slowly losing weight, at least I've lost my first 10 pounds of Vosh, right? So here's to losing the next 25. Right? If all YouTubers are on a quest to become less like Vosh in the same way that I'm trying to become less fat, at least the first 10 pounds off are something to write home about. So with that in mind, God bless, good night. Everyone have a great rest of the week. I'm going to be trying to dedicate the rest of my time I have in this week getting finished with either an essay or an edited video. But I'm not going to make promises about what specific project I'm going to try to finish in the time that I have. In the meantime, cheers and blessings to everyone, and everyone have a good rest of the night.